number one challenge with this one is probably going to be the breathing, surprisingly, because I'm still trying to breathe like my normal self again. But also, I think I talked about this a little bit in terms of the flute last week, but here is a good example in clarinet of this moderate staccato, it's not really all staccato, but this often staccato, moderate speed, like short and separated tonguing that like when you slow fast, like when you slow staccato, or even like, I don't know, I feel like all of this study is, with anything that's not slurred is staccato-ish, and the parts that are marked staccato, for example, here and here, they are like more so. And when it's faster, staccato on, I think, most wind instruments, at least in my limited experience, I don't know very much about oboe, bassoon, or saxophone. It's harder when you slow it down, because then the details, those note endings, they become more prominent. And if they're not nice, it's really easy to notice. When you're doing a short and separated articulation, momentum is your friend. It carries you through that. And if you don't have that, if you're kind of like each note is kind of separate and needs to be distinct from the next one, then it can get very difficult to make it sound nice. And I think this is something that most clarinet players struggle with at some point. So I'm going to practice with the metronome some. And because we're not going to get any faster than this is our tempo, even though it's fairly slow, I'm going to try and treat each of the notes that is articulated but is not a staccato, almost like it's got like that articulation where you have like the slur over the staccato. Some people like to treat that as a legato tongue, where it's a slur and the staccato means like separate it. I prefer to interpret that marking as it is a softened staccato. So the notes are short and separated, but they're a bit softer on either end, you know? Like if you cut like a chunk out of a piece of wood to make something, and then that's like the staccato, and then sanding the edges to make them smooth and round, that would be the slur over the staccato. Anyway, back to breathing, which is what I said I want to talk about before. Mr. Height always has so many breath marks added in. I do want all his suggestions. I don't know that I'm going to use all of them, but I may not end up using all of them. I think it would be a good place to start. There are a few places where I feel like I found them naturally, but there were definitely a few places where I kind of just breathed because I had to. And something like this, a study like this, if I had to play this on an exam, first of all, I would not choose it for myself. But if I had to play it, if it was chosen for me, this is the first thing I would do, is make sure I knew where I was going to breathe and practice it. Practice making them sound as nice as I possibly can. Even when there's a place where like it kind of feels like I'm leaving a hole. The key is, if you don't feel like you can make it sound as pretty as you would like, make it sound intentional. Whatever that means. It means you have to, if it means going kind of against your aesthetic, or not against it, but working differently from like what your aesthetic is or how you would have wanted to approach it. It's better that it sounds like whatever it is that you did it 100% on purpose than like, okay, I get what you're driving at, but it didn't quite happen. Does that make sense at all? So if your preference is one thing, but it's not physically possible, maybe file that away for later and instead think, what is a musical choice that I can make here and execute well? That's what I'm trying to say. Like something that you can identify as a valid choice that would make sense, that you can communicate to the listener or your panel, if it's a jury or an exam, that you know you can carry off, even if it's not your first choice. But sometimes when we make when I've made those decisions before, when I've not played a phrase in a piece of music the way I wanted to because I needed to accommodate like a logistical issue, then somebody will come up later and be like, oh, what you did there was really interesting. I really liked it. And then I kind of like chuckled to myself and I'm like, oh, thank you. You know, me like 10, 15 years ago, I might be like, oh, but I didn't want to do that. I want to do this. And now at least I do my best to just say, thank you for the compliment. And then I can just like grimace inwardly that like, oh, but it would have been better with, this other option. So I'm going to go from the top with the metronome and with a focus on the breath marks that I just wrote in, identifying whether or not they're going to work for me. And if I need additional breaths, how can I make them musical? But I'm also going to work on isolating a few of the trickier moments in the fingers. I think I did better in that run through with a couple of them that were worrying me, but there are a couple that are still tricky, and they definitely are kind of like not quite what I wanted. I'm also going to put the eighth note subdivision on just to help even more keep myself from rushing. And I can hear one of my old teachers in my head as I'm playing this telling me not to clip the 16ths at the end of the slurs, but I want to on purpose. I feel like one way to interpret it is to play it like I don't like that. I like it better. I feel like it's bouncier. I feel like it keeps the phrase moving more. But I just want to make sure that when I kind of like clip those notes, it's an intentional, nice note ending that is kind of clipped in short, and not like the note is short because I couldn't be bothered and I was in a hurry to get on to the next note. So that's what I'm doing. I go from the beginning one more time. So the only one that I want to not clip too much is this one right here. I haven't done it the way I want to yet, but I want it to be, I'm even going to circle it. I don't want it to be quite so clipped because of the way the breath is after it. Oops. And that wasn't quite the right note length either. I guess I don't want it longer, but I want it more resonant, I think is what I'm trying to say. That was better, but then the high A flat is something funny. That's better, but I'm going to keep going. Okay, this is that spot. I always get a little stuck. I did okay the second time I played through it. The first time I had to kind of start over. And I'm not exactly sure what is causing that moment. I think it's this right here. It's two things. It's not misreading the A as the C, which I do a lot. Let me go back to the repeat. I think I did an okay job playing through it before, but I definitely want to make sure these 16-note triplets are not rushed. I was going to do the same place right after that first repeat. So I started getting shaky before in this measure because the articulation changes. Instead of having slur 3, tongue 1, or tongue 1, slur 3, we have tongue 1, slur 2, and then tongue 1. I like to use the T's for tongue. Some people use like staccato when they want to indicate that they should be tonguing. But I don't like to do that because I don't want to confuse it with an actual staccato. So I use T's. I find this to be one of the more difficult articulation patterns to master. And it's one of those, like, when it comes up in the repertoire for me, I usually have to, like, live with it for a bit before I feel like I've really got it. Okay, so that one looks confusing because it's like 2 slurs. It's like a slur over 2 of them and then another slur over top. That doesn't make sense to me. Height corrected it to just the 1 slur. So I'm going to kind of color it in. So that breath, if I just take it, it's not going to sound good. So I'm going to put a little bit of a writ, not even a writ, just a little arrow, pulling things back, heading into it, so I can make it more musical. So that doesn't really work right now with the metronome, but it'll sound better when I turn it off. So I messed up the notes, but that should give me an idea of what I'm going to be headed towards. So I'm going to put the metronome back on. I messed up there before. I played it E flat when I played it through, but I just kept going. But it is a G flat. I'm going to get into that one more time. I think I'm going to do kind of the same thing here. I can't make it all the way through that chromatic scale descending without a breath. So I'm going to pull back just a hair on those repeated D flats. And then I'm going to put a breath right before. And I think that'll make sense musically. Yeah, without the metronome though. I'm tempted to change the ending, cross out the slur there and put a tongue note on the D flat. I think I would do that just because I feel like it's a nicer ending than kind of like slurring into it. I just think it's clearer. That's just my opinion. So I've been doing it anyway, kind of instinctively. And I think because I don't have a teacher who would say you must do it a certain way, I think that's what I would do. But there are actually no dynamic markings at all. I mean, you can see there's not a single one. So I want to borrow, I think for the most part, you can let it follow the natural ups and downs. When the notes go up, it should be getting louder. When the notes come down the scale, it should be getting softer. I feel like it's pretty straightforward. There are a couple moments, though, where Height made some suggestions. So, like, yeah, I agree with him saying, like, the beginning is mezzo forte. And I think you want to try and maintain mezzo forte or even forte, what I like to call air energy throughout. So I'm going to write in some of these dynamic markings. And some of them I might change. But I think most of them are pretty good. This is the big one, though, that I feel like is the biggest change that Haidt made, adding this piano. It's the only piano dynamic written in to the entire study. And I think that can make for a really interesting moment. Also, any of these times where I added the little pullback, that is definitely a moment to like crescendo. I feel like if you're going to do that, if you're going to pull things back so that you can grab a nice breath, you want to crescendo into that so that those notes before the breath are supported. And so that the breath sounds intentional. It's really difficult to grab a quick breath after like a descending line when you're getting softer. Because if you don't do it just right, it can sound like you just ran out of air and kind of like petered out of existence. If you do it after a crescendo, it sounds much more intentional and much more planned. So it kind of makes sense. The one spot that I feel like he really added that adds like a little bit of color, a little bit of variety is this one right here. The beginning of that line down to that piano. So I want to try that out for sure. So I'm going to go right at the beginning. I disagree with that one. Already, I disagree with him. I want to crescendo there. And then maybe here, start a little bit softer, like a mezzo piano. I just think that would sound nicer. Same thing. I wouldn't do that. I feel like those cadences, the endings of those musical ideas should be confident and loud. This is not the place to like subvert expectations and make it softer. And I think so that should be forte. The F should step it back a bit and be mezzo forte. I don't think my instinct would be to take crescendo, but I don't hate it. I'm going to try that one again. I don't mind that one. Yeah, no, that's actually fine. I think I like that. I'm going to do that section one more time. I'm going to pick it up after that repeat and work on that spot again. No, I'm going to go back to that first repeat. Yeah, I like that decrescendo. I keep going. Oops. That's the spot I stumbled over earlier. I think I forgot to come back to. Yeah. So part of it is voicing on that B flat for some reason. I'm just going to circle it. I don't really have a good marking that indicates like voice this properly. And by voicing, I mean like, it's really like singing the note, but in your head without actually singing. Does that make sense at all? Because when you play a woodwind instrument, you often use those same muscles, like you're talking and singing. And on clarinet, same on flute, but it's a little bit of a different experience. If you don't sing the note to the right spot, it's not going to happen. It's not going to come out nicely. And that's what I did there. I undervoiced it. So I think I'm going to go ahead and play it through one last time. So I'm going to play it from the top one last time.